tomorrow will be better. What happens to the kinetic energy when the velocity is halved? Follow me, dear friends. Solution. So many candidates here will guess and say, of course, maybe it's going to double the kinetic energy, or it's going to reduce the kinetic energy by half and all of that. But let's show mathematically and scientifically what happens when an object's velocity is reduced by half. Let's start by recalling the expression for kinetic energy of an object. Kinetic energy is given by half the mass times the square of the velocity of the object. Okay, so clearly the kinetic energy depends directly on the velocity of that object. Now let's suppose an initial kinetic energy and call it E1 to be half of n and then an initial velocity v1 all squared. Let's examine what will happen if this initial velocity were divided by 2, okay? So, let's find a certain E2 for which the velocity is the initial velocity divided by 2. So, in this second expression, dear friends, to make things simpler, I'm going to say, but this V2 we're talking about here is actually V1, which has been halved. Okay, it's actually V1 which has been halved. Okay, so we will say therefore E2, the kinetic energy, the second kinetic energy, will be equal to half of the mass, this time around times V2 all square, which is actually V1 all over 2, and then we raise all this part to the power 2. All right, so we will proceed by simplifying this expression. This means E2, this means E2 is going to be equal to half of the mass. Now we know that there's a property of indices that says that A all over B raised all square is the same as A square all over B square. So the index becomes shared to them, to each of them. So I'm going to apply the same thing here. This square here goes to this and to this. So, and V1 raised to the power 2 will be V1 all square all over 2 raised to the power 2 will be 4. Okay. Now at this point, don't hurry to simplify things. Notice one other property here of fractions, which says that A, B, C all over maybe, I don't know, maybe Y is the same as 1 all over Y times A, B, C. Look at what I've done. In other words, this 4 here, which is under, can be brought out and factored as a fraction, okay? And that's what I'm about to do here right now. So this means E2 will be equal to this 4 here, will be now like a factor of half of n v1 all squared. But notice something. Notice that all of this part here is nothing else but E1, okay? All of this here is E1. Therefore, E2 is going to be equal to 1/4 of E1. And the conclusion of this question is, if you have the velocity of an object, then its kinetic energy is going to reduce by a factor of 4, because tomorrow will be better.